good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are today. This is Emiko Atherton. I am the director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, a program of Smart Growth America located in Washington, D.C. And I'm so excited here today to be opening up the fourth in our 2017 webinar series on implementation and equity. Today we're talking about making the most of Main Streets, complete streets and walkable communities. I'm so lucky to be joined by one of my steering committee partners, America Walks, along with the Langley Main Street Association and the City of Langley, Washington. I have a little bit of a personal pride in being able to offer this today, as I am a Washington State, well, not a resident anymore, but I was born and raised and worked for a long time in Washington State and have got to experience Langley Main Street myself and know how wonderful it is and the learning lessons on what they've done and how it can translate across the country. I'm going to start by introducing Ian Thomas, who will be introducing the topic and the webinar today. Ian is the State and Local Program Director with America Walks. Ian was actually one of the first people I met when I started as the Director of the Complete Streets Coalition. We met at the Walking Summit about a year and a half ago here in Washington, D.C., and I'm so lucky that we've continued to stay in touch through America Walks' relationship with the National Complete Streets Coalition. He is such a champion of walkability and complete streets. At America Walks, Ian develops and delivers educational programs for advocates, professionals, and elected officials about the benefits of walkable communities and strategies to create them. From 2000 to 2013, Ian also served as the founding executive director of the PEDNET Coalition for Columbia, Missouri. During this time, he coordinated a campaign, or he developed, one of the largest walking school bus programs in the country, coordinated a campaign that led to Columbia adopting the first Complete Streets policy in Missouri. So thank you, Ian, and was instrumental in reducing neighborhood speed limits. In 2013 and in 2016, Ian won election to the Columbia City Council, where he continues to advance healthy and walkable community policies. Through this role, he's a member of Smart Growth America's Local Leaders Council, and he is the National League of Cities. He also serves on the National League of Cities Transportation and Infrastructure Committees. Ian is also a wonderful person and such an advocate for this. And with that, I will turn it over to Ian, who will really discuss the connection between walkability and community health.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Emiko, for that lovely introduction. I want to make sure I can advance this slide, which doesn't seem to be happening. Let's try this instead. There we go. So there's my opening slide. Very much looking forward to making this presentation. It's become such a topic of great interest, is how we apply complete streets, walkability, healthy community policies in rural areas. For a long time, people didn't really have a good answer to that question, but now we're developing more and more case studies, and I'm going to focus today on a case study in a small town in Arkansas. One of the features of these rural walkability projects is that there's a great tie-in with economic revitalization. So that'll be a large part of the data that I provide. So as Emiko says, I'm the State and Local Program Director with America Walks. We're a national education and advocacy organization committed to increasing walking and expanding walkable communities across the U.S. And I'm also a member of the City Council in my hometown, Columbia, Missouri, and I continue to campaign for local policies that promote health, social equity, and sustainability. So when Emiko invited me to speak on this webinar, the first task was to identify key takeaways or learning objectives. So here are the three that I came up with. That automobile-oriented sprawl has led to the decline in rural main streets. We see it all over the country, and especially in those more rural states. However, And in the positive vein, small-town mayors are very effective champions for Main Street revitalization projects, and I'll be talking about one of those today, but there are many others. And thirdly, walkability improvements in rural downtowns can catalyze economic development. Here's an outline for the talk. I'm going to give a little more detail about America Walks and then dive straight into our case study. The city is Batesville, Arkansas. It's about 150 miles north of Little Rock in a rural area, town of 10,000. Mayor Rick Ellenbaugh has been the mayor for over 10 years and is really the spearhead for all of the changes that have happened in Batesville, although he's had tremendous support from other community stakeholders. We'll talk about the plan that was developed in 2014 to re-envision and redesign Main Street, and then some of the both community, health, and economic impacts that have happened in a very short period of time. It's remarkable to me how this downtown area has been transformed in just 3 years. So first of all, America Walks. Our primary role is to engage, inform, and mobilize a network of advocates and organizations across the country. Over the last 20 years, we have grown a national walking movement, and these days we provide webinars and trainings. We have our long-distance online walking college program and deliver a tremendous volume of communications through our mailing list, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. We also deliver a lot of webinars, and I would encourage you to check out our webinar series as well. We focus on both encouraging walking and the more difficult, long processes of changing policy to change the built environment to create walkable places. We know that we have to change the built environment in order to get people to walk in substantial numbers. We work in partnership for these efforts with other organizations, including the National Complete Streets Coalition, the Partnership for Active Transportation, Transportation Equity Caucus, and we're the managing organization for the Everybody Walk Collaborative. We also deliver a series of state collaborative workshops where we work with both the Transportation Department and the Public Health Department in a given state to hold a workshop to learn about the benefits of walkable communities, the strategies for accomplishing them across the state, and help pull together a coalition of both government and non-government organizations in those states to develop and then implement an action plan going forward. We've worked in 7 states, and one of those is the state of Arkansas. So let's turn to Batesville, a town of about 10,000 people spread over 10 square miles. That's a fairly low density over the whole city. 1,000 people per square mile does not support good walkability or public transport. However, the downtown area is much denser, certainly in terms of buildings. There's a tremendous skeleton of good bones, as my friend Dan Burden would say, in terms of the old historic buildings. This is the oldest living city in the state of Arkansas. There was one city that predated Batesville's incorporation, but it ceased to exist shortly after that. So Batesville has a rare claim to fame as the oldest living city in Arkansas. So the central business district has a grid structure. It could be extremely walkable. It's very compact and as I mentioned, lots of great buildings. That close-up map there shows the business district essentially in the dark and slightly less dark red. It's about a mile long and a half-mile wide. And notice the creek that flows in that unusual pattern, just encircling the downtown area. That's called the Polk Bayou, and it flows then to the south into the White River, which is the main river in Batesville. This is what the downtown looked like in 2014. This is Main Street. At that time, They had a 41% vacancy rate. Basically, the city building, the county, this is the county seat, the county building, the banks, and a few other businesses were operating during the day. There was absolutely no nightlife, and no economic activity except just serving the daytime businesses, really, and nobody living downtown. A quick word about Mayor Ellenbaugh. He had a career as a physical education instructor. He became interested in public policy in Batesville as he saw the young people that he had been teaching and engaging in physical activity and sports and recreation leaving Batesville and not coming back. And he had the fear that the town was going to die if the young people didn't come back. And he had the vision to realize that a healthy community that supports activity, trails, and a vibrant downtown were essential. And he essentially ran on that ticket in 2007 and has made tremendous progress over the years, passing a tax to build a brand new state-of-the-art recreation center, funding trails throughout the town, and then towards 2014 focusing his efforts on the downtown area. I mentioned Dan Burden before. I had the privilege of working with Dan on this visit to Batesville in February 2014 when Rick, with the assistance of the local banks in downtown Batesville, brought us in to do a kind of a workshop, a community engagement process, an assessment of the town, and help the local stakeholders develop a plan for revitalizing the downtown by improving walkability. As you can see, it was a wintry day. There was a tremendous snow and ice storm the day before, which made traveling in difficult and also reduced participation. But nevertheless, we had dozens of members of the community from the Main Street organization, the Chamber of Commerce, the banks, the hospital. There's a community college in Batesville, from the different branches of government based there, and the advocacy groups, and had a really productive and highly engaged couple of days collecting input and putting together the basis of a plan for downtown Batesville and for Main Street in particular. So here's an outline of that plan. It was organized into 4 parts. The 100-day challenge was supposed to be items that the leadership team, it was being led by the Main Street Batesville organization, kind of an economic development group, part of a national network of Main Street organizations, that they, with their key partners, would do during the first 100 days. Expand the coalition, create their own plan. Our plan was sort of essentially from the outside, so it was important that they took our ideas and then formed them into their own plan, which they would probably want to get adopted by the city council or collect input from the people, and organize one event that spring in the April to bring people downtown. There hadn't been any public events downtown for years. The place had been dying. Low-hanging fruit is considered things to do within the first year or so, fairly easy and inexpensive initiatives that would move the project forward while other planning went on. Collecting input from the public. One of our main recommendations, there were traffic signals in Main Street that served no purpose at all. There was very little traffic. The traffic that was there drove too fast between the signals, often hit red lights, and the signals cost the city quite a bit to operate. So we recommended they took out the traffic signals, designed a modified layout, which I'll talk about in a minute, but generally created much more pedestrian space, created a much more aesthetic and comfortable and safe environment for pedestrians, and slowed down traffic, and a couple of other ideas there for sort of supporting the economic benefit, the economic expansion later. The mid-range projects, we were looking at more like 2 or 3 years here, and the long-range initiatives 5 to 10 years out to do some more significant legal and policy actions, as well as some major infrastructure redesigns that would take quite a bit of time and quite a bit of money. So this is what the center of downtown Batesville looked like in 2014. This is the intersection of Main. We're looking straight down Main to the east, and 4th Street going across. And this is a rendering that the Walk Institute, Dan Burden's organization, did to help the Main Street organization and the other stakeholders in Batesville envision what could be possible. And you'll see that some of the key changes here are narrowing the street to just one lane. It was a 2-lane, one-way street prior to that, and it did not need to be 2 lanes. We talked about possibly turning it into a 1 lane each way, but really felt that actually it only needed to be 1 lane one way. There was a parallel street that was one way the other way, and that we could use that extra space for parking, landscaping, sidewalk improvements. We recommended a lot of textured surface, as well as you can see a real focus on the landscaping. So here again is what it looked like in 2014, and this was the vision that came out of the community engagement process, and that was then presented back as this exact graphic to help promote public support for the changes and provide a guide. So here is what that intersection looks like right now. And this photograph was taken just 2 days ago at that same intersection, Main and 4th. And you can see it's not too different from what was envisioned. They did indeed narrow the lanes. They put in the angle parking on one side, leaving the parallel parking on the other. Added a lot of landscaping, which of course creates those bulb outs to reduce crossing distances and improve safety for pedestrians, as well as improving the overall appearance for pedestrians. So let's quickly move, I know we're running short of time, to what impacts this had. In terms of the streetscape, in 3 years they have rebuilt all 5 blocks of the business districts that were originally identified for this. Each block cost about $20,000 to rebuild based on the design. They installed in each block 10 to 12 landscaped bays or areas with trees and plants and so on, built irrigation into that. They offered partial grants to businesses to improve their facades, to improve the sidewalks in front of their buildings. The first block was paid for in full by an anonymous donation. After that, the city, with support from the banks and from grants that the Main Street organization received, funded the next 3 blocks, and then the final block was titled the People's Block, and Main Street invited people to donate $500 each towards the reconfiguration. This was immensely successful. They raised $22,000 in a short period of time, and were able to fully do that, putting in acknowledgement bricks with people's names on it who had contributed to this. They focused on pocket parks and public spaces, reviving and improving some park areas. A lot with a dilapidated building was donated to the city. They demolished the building and they made that lot into a pocket park. They also started a farmer's market on another vacant lot right on Main Street. That's what that lower photograph is. And a boating business that rents canoes and rowing boats set up shop, putting those boats onto the Polk Bayou, which is in that upper photograph there, going under the bridge. And that was kind of a an indication of the economic interest in the revitalized downtown, as more and more people are now coming downtown, attending events, attending the farmers market, which meets twice a month, and thinking about setting up their own operations and businesses in the downtown area. So now there is a 0 vacancy rate. There are only 2 buildings out of the 56 that are not currently in service, and they're both undergoing renovations and will be opened up as soon as they're done. A new restaurant was built about a year ago, and that was the first new construction in downtown Batesville since 1959. The Melba Theater was massively refurbished. This was an early 20th century mercantile store. It was a theater from 1940 until the early 1990s. It closed, and the building struggled for many years, but it was finally reopened last year. The downtown, or rather the Main Street Batesville organization holds fundraisers there. They have other events about once every month or a couple of months, and a recent event attracted a capacity crowd of 450 people to that auditorium, again indicating how downtown is becoming this much more attractive place for the people of Batesville and throughout the county. There's other new construction going on with loft apartments being built above the Main Street stores. There are 2 that are already occupied, and expected to be about 20 completed and occupied within about a year from now. At the same time, the hospital has just announced, and will start in August, a new medical residency program, which will bring over several years a maximum enrollment of 48 young people participating in the medical residency program who will need somewhere to live and who will likely be very interested in living in these loft apartments downtown, just a couple of miles from the hospital, and connected by a bike trail that is now under design and construction. The realtors are all saying that the property values are rising downtown, and sales tax rising with that to help the city sustain these improvements. And finally, I want to just point attention to one particular building, the Barnett Building, which was constructed in 1903 as a department store. It had been used for various purposes through the 20th century, and then shuttered and declined, and ultimately was donated to the city by the final private owners in 2015. So the city has taken ownership of this. They've installed a business incubator in one part of the building, funded through a Rockefeller grant. The Main Street Batesville organization rents the upper level from the city, and the county library is now investing $2.7 million in another large part of the building to renovate this, to renovate the entire building, move the library in there, which would actually quadruple the space that the library currently has in a small 1960s building a couple of blocks away. Estimates are that when the library is fully restored and reopened in the new building, that'll bring another 300 people per day downtown onto Main Street, and that will continue to support the revival of the downtown economy there. So very exciting story from Batesville. With that, I shall close and look forward to answering your questions later.
Thanks so much, Ian. That was fabulous. And I know I have a ton of questions for you, but we're actually holding questions and answers to the end, so stay tuned. If you do have questions, I should mention, please put them in the chat box on the lower left-hand side of your screen, and we will be able to get to the questions at the end. The next, I want to introduce 2 people from my home state, Washington State. The first is Lorinda Kay, who is the program manager for the Langley Main Street Association, and she started in May of 2013. Prior to this position, she worked in several roles at the local newspaper, the South Whidbey Record from 1986 to 2013, as the associate editor, manager, and administrator. She also spent a decade as a freelance photographer, and she's lived on Whidbey Island since 1976 and raised her 3 children there. And I should mention that Langley is actually on Whidbey Island, which is a short-ish, it's about a half hour, if I remember correctly, ferry ride from downtown Seattle. And the next person I want to introduce is Bridget Reynolds. She's the Director of Community Development for the City of Langley on Whidbey Island, Washington. She's a professional planner with more than 20 years of experience in community planning in small coastal communities on Vancouver Island and now Whidbey Island. She has a comprehensive understanding of planning and development issues faced by small local governments. Her planning background is wide-ranging and for the 20 years she's worked as a planner, she's worked in-depth on issues such as affordable housing, freshwater, marine and terrestrial environments, growth management, rural and urban interfaces, or the interface between rural and urban areas, climate change mitigation and adaptation, energy and community development, and she spends much of her time as possible sailing around the Salish Sea. So thank you both, Bridget and Lorinda, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, well, thanks, Amiko, and thanks, Ian. That was a really great and very inspiring presentation. So we're really glad to be here and to talk to you a bit about our experience with Complete Streets in Langley, and I'm going to hand it over to Lorinda.
So I want to introduce you, the next slide, I want to introduce you to the city of Langley. We are situated in the northeast corner of Washington on Whidbey Island. And the town was incorporated in 1913, and we're known as a friendly, walkable seaside town overlooking Saratoga Passage. We're about 1 square mile in area, so it is a small population of 1,100 people, but we are the service center for South Whidbey, and South Whidbey population is 20,000. We are about 1 hour from Seattle, including a ferry ride, or you can access us at our marina, which serves both large and small craft. So one thing that happened last year was we were nominated and voted one of the happiest coastal seaside towns in America. We are known for our historical character. A lot of original buildings are still in our main street. We're also known for our arts in Langley, both visual and performance arts. We're also known for our gray whales that visit our waters every spring. We have extensive gardens in town that we keep up and maintain. And now we've gained notoriety for a growing pest population, which is fluffy bunnies that are in our town.
So to build on what Lorinda's talking about, it's really important to mention the people in our community. We've got a very active and engaged citizenry here in Langley. Council has a total of 8 citizen committees, and there's a number that are particularly vital when we're talking about the urban form and streetscapes and so on. So we've got a very active arts commission, and they've been responsible for adding a number of pieces of public art in our streets. Design Review Board, they review applications, both new and for redevelopment, to ensure that there's consistency with the overall character of the community. Our Historical Preservation Committee, they play a very active role as well in trying to ensure that the older buildings, the historic buildings in our community remain, and work with property owners to try to increase designations. Langley Main Street is a very active organization in the community, and it was established in 2011, and since then the city and Main Street Association have had a very strong partnership. So Main Street's got 4 active committees, which again are working about promoting Langley. So there's a promotion and economic development committee, design, and also sort of administration and review. Our Chamber of Commerce, also, again, a very strong organization and responsible for a number of activities that happen through the year. One of our highlight events is our Murder Mystery Weekend that happens in February, and this is this past year was our 33rd annual Murder Mystery Weekend, and that's the longest running Murder Mystery Weekend in America. Another thing that's worth noting is our Cultural Vitality Index in Langley is 3.06. So what that is it's a measure of our creative economy. And to give you a comparison, for the state of Washington, the CVI is 1, and that's the national index is 1, whereas for Washington it's 0.97. So we have a very vital creative initiatives, both visual and performing arts, and so aesthetics and the public realm and so on is very important to our community and our community members. So our first experience with a Complete Street project was 2nd Street, and that's a picture of it there. And so it started out as an infrastructure project that, and there was recognition at the time that there was a real opportunity to enhance the streetscape and improve the street design and make it much more compatible for all modalities, rather than just focusing on the car, which was what the principal focus was. We had the roadway was failing. It was about 45 years old. The stormwater system was also in need of repair. There had been a slide up at the top. You see perpendicular to 2nd Street, this cascade. There was a slide there that also impacted that part of the street. So the city started work on the 2nd Street project back in 2011, and then council adopted a Complete Street ordinance in 2012. And so that really created that focus of improving the pedestrian aspect of the street. We hired our consultant in May 2012, and then worked on the design. The design was selected in August of 2012, and that was done with a lot of community engagement. Construction didn't actually start until January of 2014, and that took about 6 months. This was all with a budget of $2.7 million, and we were fortunate in receiving funds of $1.4 million from state and federal agencies. And then we were also utilizing additional dollars from our utility and our general funds.
So as Bridget mentioned, the community engagement was key in getting people to understand what changes we wanted to make and how those could improve the 2nd Street for all modalities and more comfortable for walking pedestrians as well. So the design, the city designed a website that had regular updates, drawings of the design, and a project schedule to keep everyone informed. The city also put together an advisory committee, which involved an architect, a landscape designer, business people, and Main Street representatives and city council representatives. So, and they formed a big partnership with the Langley Main Street Association that could help throughout a number of steps in getting this planning done. There were numerous community meetings, including a 3-day charrette and walking tour that involved professionals from both architecture and engineering that could answer questions and walk through this plan. And then September of 2012, in preparation for the construction that would take place, the city adopted an ordinance to support economic development. So they reduced the parking restrictions, reduced the building permit fees and the water service connection fees, and allowed for street cafes, which had not been allowed for before. And then once the construction started, of course there was disruption. The streets were torn up, the sidewalks were torn up, but Langley Main Street wanted to be proactive in keeping people coming to town. So we gave each business on 2nd Street the artist's conception of the finished project. So when people came in and grumbled about the equipment and the noise and the torn up sidewalks, they'd say, yes, but look what's coming. So they had something positive to take away. We also designed a game to get people into every shop with weekly drawings with prizes available to people so that people would continue to shop in town. And the final drawing had $500 worth of gift certificates that the winner was able to take home. We also had an event called Monsters on Machines, and with the permission of the construction company, they lined all their machines up on 2nd Street, and we invited the kids to come and sit in the driver's seat and climb up on the machines. We also invited Deborah Lunn, a local children's author, to read her book called Monsters on Machines, which we named the event after her book, and she did a reading in the local restaurant and had kids come. They loved it. They filled the streets. They wandered all over these machines and would have driven away had they been able to. So it was a great feel-good event. The other thing, the city wanted to make sure they had good, accurate directional signage so folks would know that the stores were still open. They could cross the street to the other sidewalk to get access. And also, when Main Street looked at the contractor's design for the bulb outs that were planned on 2nd Street, they were okay, but they weren't remarkable. And Main Street is known for creating remarkable gardens in town. And we had a very active garden committee. So they asked if we couldn't pick out the plants. So the city not only allowed us to design the bulb outs, but turned over the installation of it to us. So over the course of 2 days, we had over 25 volunteers that planted all of the bulb outs. The city had a budget of $20,000 for the project, but we only spent $10,000 on the plants because the labor was all done by the volunteers. And we planted 20 bulb outs along 2nd Street, and Langley Main Street does the long-term maintenance of those bulb outs.
So here's the pictures showing our finished 2nd Street. So the improvements included, the street design that really was about improving both safety and comfort. And also what was really key was creating a center plaza. As you see, there's tables that are put out there seasonally, and there's benches there for all year round seating. There's nice lighting, colorful pavers to create some visual interest. And also the sidewalks are also treated with different pavers, again, so there's those visual cues for drivers to slow down. And as was mentioned, a lot of landscaping was done. A number of locations were identified and pedestals installed for public art. And since 2nd Street was completed, we've since added another pedestal, and more continue to be installed. And the Arts Commission works on treats that as a rotating gallery for public art.
And so now 2nd Street is utilized for many public events. We have, in the summer, we have a weekly farmers market. We close a portion of the street, set up the farmers market, and becomes a very lively, walkable area. The end of the summer, we close the plaza, the central plaza area, set up tables and chairs, and invite the community to come have a community feast. It's sort of our way of taking back the streets after the tourist season. In the July, we have a street dance where we again close the center plaza, have a band, and people literally dance in the street. And then Memorial Day weekend, which is coming up, we offer the Pause 5 10K run walk. We close 2nd Street. We invite runners to come, and the race begins on 2nd Street and ends on 2nd Street. It involves not only adults and their dogs, but kids. We have a kids run.
So now we're fortunate in that we're going to be working on another complete street project for 1st Street. So First Street runs parallel to Second, and it's closest to the top of the bluff overlooking Saratoga Passage. So, however, First Street is much narrower than Second Street, so we don't have the same kind of area to work with. We also don't have the same funding opportunities because this is a local road and not a collector road as Second Street is. So as with Second Street, there were some basic infrastructure improvements that needed to be done. We need to improve the pedestrian crosswalks and make them more visible. We need more crosswalks as well, because you'll see there's a linear park that runs down at the bottom of the bank, and there's a couple of access points off of First Street that we want to improve. The road itself is wearing, so it needs to be resurfaced. We have to improve the curb ramps to become ADA compliant, and then our sidewalks need to be widened because in some places they're quite narrow, and of course lighting improvements as well.
So because of the funding challenges, we needed to find ways to fund this project. The state of Washington offers a grant opportunity through the Transportation Improvement Board. It's called a Complete Streets Program, to emphasize all modalities of traffic. And over the next 2 years, there's a $14 million biannual grant program that's to serve as an incentive program to local governments to improve their street using the Complete Streets model. This money can be used for planning, implementation, and some construction. The criteria is the city needs to be working on or have adopted a Complete Streets ordinance and demonstrate public involvement in the planning. Because Langley Main Street had a history of success with Second Street, and we were able to be nominated for a grant, which was also a criteria. You needed to be nominated by one of a number of agencies. So due to our track record and because our need for the First Street improvement, we were nominated by the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, which the Main Street program comes under that department. So we received a $250,000 grant from this program to help us get forward on our planning and construction.
So as mentioned, and you can see from these images how, in parts the sidewalk is really quite narrow and doesn't allow two people to walk side by side. The car dominates and encroaches onto the sidewalks. We have virtually no bicycle facilities on First Street, and the pedestrian crossings are lacking. As mentioned, there's a couple of parks that we want to improve some connection to and make them more inviting. So these are some of the things that we had discussed internally with staff as well as with Main Street. And so we recognized that we needed to take what we thought were the issues and take them out to the community and start having some conversations with the business owners, the business operators, and local residents to find out what they thought were the priorities for improving First Street.
So last fall, we had our first public planning meeting with the community, and we invited business owners, property owners, membership from Main Street and the Chamber and the city email list. We had 40 people attend, and we put the information out there through social media, emails, and news releases, served refreshments, and we gained over 66 suggestions from this, which were some we hadn't thought of and some wonderful ideas. Of course, there were improving, including more crosswalks, enlarging and improving the parks, adding seating in the park areas, adding bike features, improving the lighting, changing the parking configuration so we had more room for sidewalk widening, of course, improving the street, adding landscaping and signage.
So our plan now is to, once the busy summer season has ended, is to go back to the community and start digging down into the details. We'd like to establish an advisory committee because we found that with 2nd Street that was quite successful in guiding the project. So spend some time clarifying the scope of work. As mentioned, we're dealing with a much smaller budget than we did with 2nd Street. And where possible, there's a couple of other opportunities that are happening or grant funds that we've received, and so we're trying as much as possible to leverage those to expand the scope of the project. So we'll be then developing our request for proposal, hiring consultants, and then to ideally start construction in the spring of 2018.
And you can see this is Whalebell Park, and one of the suggestions that came out of our public meeting was to bump out this park area more into the street, to expand it, make it more visually as a destination, and to put parking and hardscapes there so the public would be more invited to walk into the park. And this is also an access down to our seawall park, so improve that access going down to the seawall. This was a great suggestion that we all were very excited about, to create another plaza-type area, but it'd be a green area.
So some of the lessons learned from 2nd Street is we didn't build in a contingency in our budget, and so as a result we went over budget, and so we're going to be cautious of that as we move forward. And as mentioned, the public engagement is critical, and because 1st Street is really our main commercial street, the concern with the disruption while we're doing the work is certainly something that has been expressed by business owners. And so really being careful in terms of making sure that there's really good signage and letting people know when businesses are open and how they can get from A to B, so that there's the disruption is limited to the greatest extent possible. So that's our introduction, and we thank you for the opportunity to talk about Langley. And here's our contact information should you have additional questions. So thanks, Nicole.
Thanks so much. That was great, Lorinda and Bridget. I'm now going to move over to the question and answer section. If you do have a question, please do type it in the box, in the Ready to Talk chat box. It should be located in your lower left-hand corner. If we do not get to your question today, we always do follow up our webinars with a recap blog post where the presenters are able to get to questions that we are not able to get to during the Q&A. I'm going to start with a question that came up from a lot of people directed at Ian. And Ian, I was wondering if you could talk about, we got to see the cross-section of the original Main Street and down in Arkansas. And, and then we saw Dan Burden's the Walking Institute's cross-section rendering, and I was wondering, we got questions about the design. For instance, what was the impetus between keeping it a one-way street? I know that, often as we move towards creating main streets, they're turning in, a lot of engineers and planners I've worked with have recommended turning them into two-way streets. We also had some questions about whether there were accommodations for bike lanes, whether that had been discussed. So maybe where did the idea for the design come from for the Main Street in Batesville?
Yeah, certainly. Well, the way that Dan generally facilitates these events, they're two-day events. He and the people on his team will work with the local, planning team leaders to get a good sense of what the community is talking about already, or maybe perhaps to be more accurate, what the visionaries in the community are talking about already. Generally, it's not a widespread vision, and that's part of the purpose of the workshops, is to expand the number of people who are engaged in the process. So as far as the sort of specific street design, yes, Mayor Ellenbar and the other two kind of key people with the Main Street Batesville organization, recognized that traffic was going too fast down Main Street, and they wanted to narrow it. There was a discussion. It was two parallel lanes, both going westbound on Main Street, and then there's another street a couple of blocks south of that, which is one way the other way. So there was a discussion about going from one way to two way. But Dan and I think a lot of sort of people who re-envision downtown areas, certainly in large cities, you want to get rid of those one-way couplets because they really do tend to just sort of kill the life of the city, because they encourage more fast driving when there's multiple lanes going in the same direction. So two-way is a lot better than one-way in most cases. In this case, it was a relatively narrow street already, and there was a feeling that the public space wanted to be expanded. And of course, car parking can actually expand the public space. It constricts the traveling vehicles. It creates a buffer with good design and landscaping kind of at the bulb-out ends of the parking lane. It can really create a good aesthetic experience for pedestrians. So it was felt that adding a parking lane, and in fact making it an angled parking lane, and reducing it to just one lane in one direction was the key. And Dan also, I think from his experience in other cities, suggested that at each intersection, it was a 5-block section, that the one lane would switch sides and the angled parking would switch to the other side. So there was a kind of a little chicane effect at each cross street. That was the design that we put in our recommendations. That was exactly the design that they adopted. There was discussion about a bicycle lane. There wasn't really room to put it in with the configuration that was agreed upon, and you know, we had a kind of a public input session with small group discussions and collecting lots of ideas from the tables of all these stakeholders, and that was where the support was. It was also thought that the bicycle lane wasn't entirely necessary because the traffic would be going quite slowly through and having to stop at each intersection. Each of those intersections was going to become a 4-way stop. There were going to be no green lights that would allow traffic just to zoom right from one end to the other in a few seconds. I also saw there was a question whether we'd thought about back-in parking, and that's interesting because that was the original recommendation, reverse-in angle parking. That was the original plan that the local team presented to the community. When they polled, you know, the whole plan with back-in parking, they had about 70% approval, 30% disapproval, and a lot of negative comments about the back-in parking. They flipped that around, made it front-end-in parking, angled, and the approval went up to 90% in favor and only 10% against. So I'm a big fan of back-in parking. The science suggests it's really much safer and better in many ways, but people don't like it, and it's something to compromise on, I think, to get support.
Thanks. That's really interesting. So this is a question for both you, Ian and Langley, both Bridget and Lorinda, so I guess it's for all three of you, but we got a lot of questions about financing, particularly how did you finance it, and then how are you continuing to fund maintenance? Because I know you touched on how you were able to get initial funding through state and federal funding sources. Lorinda, I heard you touch on the utility grant, but you know, a little bit more about the sources, and then is your general fund covering the maintenance? Is it your public works budget? Can you talk about that?
Well, I can start. I mean, as mentioned, you know, we've been fortunate in getting grants for the initial work, the installation, construction, the design, construction, et cetera. I mean, we did also use and will use some funds from our streets budget in part for the First Street project. Maintenance, then we start building maintenance into our street funds for ongoing maintenance. And as Lorinda mentioned, like with the landscaping, you know, what might normally be a pretty large budget item that's all been done by Main Street. So that's and by volunteers, and they have an intern as well. But that's been really helpful for us in terms
Right.
of.
Well, and I guess a question is, so I get facilitators' privileges to have you further expound. But one of the things, 2 webinars ago, we focused on the return on investment in complete streets. And perhaps one of the things that we talk about when we talk about, you do have to cover maintenance, but hypothetically, because you're bringing in businesses, your vacancy rates are lower, you're generating more sales and property taxes, that should be covering your maintenance costs, and so you're actually, you're bringing in more tax revenue. Did you find that in Langley? Did that happen as well in Batesville?
We do have an increase occurring within Langley in terms of filling up vacant buildings. We did have a number of vacant buildings, and now we are starting to see more and more improvements in buildings, more occupancy, and fewer vacancies. So we certainly have had a rise in our sales tax revenue over the past 3-4 years, and a rise in the number of businesses that are in town.
And in Batesville, the vacancy rate went from over 40% to 0 with new construction happening over just a 3-year period, starting with that planning process in early 2014. They haven't managed to calculate the increased sales and property taxes yet. It's a very rapidly moving target because entrepreneurs and developers and investors are kind of coming in all the time. But clearly that is generating and will generate some significant additional funds in that downtown area. A few other things. Batesville was very fortunate in that 2 community banks with downtown branches or central offices were right behind this project from the start. In fact, they paid for Dan Burden and myself and the Walk Institute to come in and do that 2-day session. They put money on the line, they had a vision and a belief, and they worked closely with the mayor and the Main Street organization to really drive this thing forward. One of the first things that the Main Street organization did after the plan was developed was form a foundation, and so citizens of Batesville can now donate, provide legacy giving, and that foundation is doing extremely well. And then that money is being used to provide matching grants to individual building owners and business owners to make improvements themselves at a discounted rate. I mentioned the People's Block, where they had, because they built such a positive vibe about what was happening downtown with the first 4 blocks being done, people just jumped right up and donated $500 each to the fund to do the 5th block. There was an anonymous donation for the first one. The other ones, I think, came from existing city funds and budgets that were directed towards this downtown effort. I would say to anybody, please don't get hung up on how are you going to find the money. If you can build a positive vibe around what you want to do, then there are investors, there are citizens, there are grants available. The city government will support things that are positive and growing. Focus on coming up with a really good plan, articulating it well, engaging the community, and building a lot of positive support. And then start filling in the blanks in your budget as to how those different pieces are going to be paid for.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think you exactly answered my question. Unfortunately, we are out of time right now. We got a lot of questions, and I know that our presenters have agreed so graciously to help answer those through our recap blog post, which should be coming up soon. Again, a really big thank you to all of our speakers today. I thought this was really interesting, really timely. These are questions that I get asked all the time about, how do you revitalize Main Street? How do you bring people home when they leave? And really growing the assets communities within the United States through their main streets and through walkability. So big thank you. Stay tuned for details about our upcoming webinars. We have one scheduled for late June, early July on the role of transit in complete streets, where we'll have the American Public Transit Association and Fred Jones from Michael Baker and Associates present on work that happened with the Jacksonville Transit Authority down in Florida. So we're very excited for that. And continue to check back on our website if you have any questions. We're always available. I will make one further plug that we are hiring right now a program associate, and so if you're interested in that, you can visit careers at www.smartgrowthamerica.org. And last, because they didn't make a plug for themselves, I do want to plug that the Walking Summit is scheduled for September in St. Paul, Minnesota, that is hosted by America Walks. It is the first event I went to as the director of the Complete Streets Coalition, and they set a high bar for me in terms of conferences, so I encourage everyone to check out the agenda and think about registering. I know Ian will be there. I'll also be facilitating the session, so I hope to see you. It is, I believe, the third week of September. Is that correct, Ian?
Yeah, it's the 13th to the 15th of September in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Perfect. And so you can find more information at americawalks.org on that. So thank you all again for joining us, and thank you to our speakers. Have a great afternoon.